Hello everyone, Simon Jacobson here, and we'll be talking about artificial intelligence. The future of the human race. Will machines enhance or replace us? This has been a growing and raging debate between different thinkers and technology people and scientists, with artificial intelligence literally at the verge of creating the next industrial revolution, affecting every aspect of our lives, from our workplace to our homes to our relationships to the global economy. Artificial intelligence, when it gets to that point where it could be on the human level, they call the full development of artificial intelligence. So the question is, will it replace the human race? You have people like Stephen Hawking or Elon Musk of Tesla and others that literally are concerned and state that this may be the end of the Homo sapiens as we know it. Once machines are good enough, they will replace the human being. It will cause people to lose jobs. It will have all other type of consequences. And ultimately, as I said, some even suggest perhaps the end of the human race as we know it. Then there are other thinkers that feel the other way around, that it's actually the dawn of a new era, not the sunset of the human race, but an enhancement that will lead people and lead the human race to another stage of their evolution and their development. However you argue, everyone agrees that it will have radical impact and influence the future and destiny and fate of humanity. As human beings create these machines that are beginning to, in Japan and other places, beginning to become more popular. So I thought it was a very healthy thing to weigh in on, because the real question that this really poses is, besides the fact, is this a stage that will lead us to higher levels of enlightenment and human transcendence, or is it a stage that will actually replace humans? That it's really an excellent opportunity to really understand the bigger question on the table is, what does it mean to be human? And what is a machine? Are we just sophisticated machines? If we humans are sophisticated machines, so it makes full total sense that if you build a better machine, that machine will replace an old machine. Are we just sophisticated machines? Can, for example, the more sublime and sensual elements of life, like love, soul, truth, transcendence, spontaneity, imagination, can you actually program an android to have that? And it should replicate what the human being is capable of. Can a machine have a soul? Put in other words. Now there are definitely thinkers that understand, and it's called the mechanics version that they actually call the non-duality of that defies Cartesian thought, where Descartes said that I am, but I think, therefore I am, is suggested that there are actually two realities in our consciousness. There's our physical bodies, and then there's our thought process and our consciousness, which he called the spirit. Spirit and body, soul and body, which is fundamental to religious thought, actually suggests a duality. But there are those that suggest, the more modern thinkers, that there is no duality, that even what is called the soul is also just another form of the machine. It's just a more sublime dimension of it. And as such, there aren't like two different dimensions. There is one dimension. Some of it is physical in a very tangible way, and some of it is more ethereal. But yet still, the mind is a far more subtle organ than, let's say, the liver. And yet, at the same time, the mind is still made up of neurons and still has, still can be analyzed and dissected and turned into a certain type of machine. And when we actually create a mind for a computer, a hard drive, or different, that are very sophisticated computers that, let's say, that run things most efficiently, some say it even surpasses the human mind. You may remember the debates were raging back then when they were first creating the first computers that really challenged the concept of the borders of intelligence. Was the chess, the IBM's, what was it called, the Big Blue, not Big Blue, something Blue. They were developing computers that at the time no one predicted that it could beat. It could beat the regular player, but not the grandmasters and the best players in the world. because chess was more than just number crunching. It required a certain amount of creativity and ingenuity and so on. And then what happened was, yes, if you remember, it was Kasparov, I think, or Karpov, who was it, the chess master at the time. And when the machine, maybe it was Deep Blue, could be, I forgot the name of it.
I think it was Nelson.
Maybe another name. There were different ones that he actually was beaten by a computer. And when he was interviewed afterwards, he said something which was very chilling. He said there was a point in the game where, he thought a machine is a machine, so a machine can obviously crunch up possibilities much better than a human being without making a mistake. But there's elements in chess that are more intuitive. He said there was a point where he felt that the machine made a move that was not based on mathematical equation, it was based on a certain intuition. That the machine had developed such a sophisticated processing, and of course it's programmed by humans, that once it developed that type of sophistication, it was able to actually deduce a move that was not predictable based on numbers. He said, I felt I was playing a human, and he was beaten. When that happened, it was a big shock to many, because everyone thought, at the end of the day, the human mind is the one that created the machine. How could a machine beat the mind that built it? But the fact of the matter is, the mind, according to this argument, is really is actually number crunching, and it is taking a lot of data and processing it. So why can't you train a machine to do that? Just like it may take us weeks and weeks to process large numbers and multiplication and other type of equations and algorithms, a machine does it much faster and with less mistakes. So why can't it at some point really surpass the human being? But the real question was not in the mathematics. Everyone knew that a calculator is going to be faster than doing it by hand, but that it should be able to also intuit and, so to speak, anticipate things that only a human mind seemed to be possible was a completely new frontier. But it's even gone beyond that. So this is a very fascinating question, not just a theoretical. It really, as I said, gets down to the heart of who are we? What really defines life? And we have these futuristic science fiction movies. Will one day somebody be able to say that a robot or an android is so human that maybe you can't kill it? Because what defines life? Is it the attachments we have with the people we love? Hypothetically, you can have that with an android. So this is what I would like to talk about, and of course address the big question: is it the end of the demise of the human race, or is it the enhancement? And as I said, this is a vital component, and it touches upon so many different important, sensitive ideas of life and death, for that matter. What defines life? What makes a human being a human being? So in an interesting way, actually, the machines, artificial intelligence, can actually be a catalyst that compels us and challenges us to ask these difficult questions, something that once upon a time we may not need to ask, and perhaps resolve some of the big dilemmas, like I just said, the difference in the Cartesian school of thought and most religious schools of thought of a certain duality that we have a soul and a body, as opposed to the messianistic, or whatever they call it, version, where we are just one machine made up of different parts. So like a computer has a keyboard, but it also has a brain, called a hard drive, called the microchip. So why can't you say human being is also that way? We're made up of different components as one machine. And it's based on rules, and the more we understand this machine, the more we can replicate. And the argument can be made, look at the airplane. The airplane essentially was replicating a bird. We studied birds, and you studied the patterns of their aerodynamics. Why do you need wings? What are the role of wings? So a plane has wings, a rudder, a landing and taking off, and the different components, all studying nature. A camera is the study of the human eye, the shutter, the lens, the ability, how much light to allow in, how much not to allow in. So we have learned to replicate in fascinating ways, and now look how sophisticated cameras are. And you go on, you can come to an argument, make a strong argument that we are machines, human beings, and we can create machines that will exactly replicate our machine called the human being. And it's not hard to imagine that we will one day be able to replace a human eye with a machine, with a manufactured eye that will have all the components and actually probably be better because it won't be subject to the wear and tear. Just like we're able to heart transplant or liver transplant or kidney transplant. But as we all know, the question is how far does that go? As I said before, can a machine have a soul? Because if you do allow it to replicate everything, then at the end of the day it can replicate and therefore also behave like it has a soul. I know it sounds, I find it quite horrifying to imagine one day that you find out that the one who's cradling you and nursing you and holding you tight and comforting you is not an actual mother, but an android. You know, I would rue the day to think that way. But I could see mechanically, technically, you could create I mean, today we don't yet have all the materials and the synthetic materials, but to actually create an actual virtual mother that will look, feel, give off the warmth, why can't it be replicated? But is it really going to be our mother? Will we need to go to therapy? Or maybe we won't need to go to therapy because it's not our real mother, you know? And of course, this goes also into the discussion, which I'm not really going to address here, genetic engineering. Can we actually create parts of the human body and replace them? And where do you draw the line? It's one thing to replace a limb, a synthetic limb, an artificial limb, or as I said before, a part of a body. But what about tampering with the DNA and making so-called a better person, getting rid of the capacity, let's say, a mutant gene that could cause infection or disease, or God forbid, the cancer thing. And it's going to be debates that are going to rage of what can we tamper with, what can't we? With all going back to the big question, what makes life life? What is a human being? Now the fact is, the prevalent view, in Western society at least, is that we are machines. We're very sophisticated machines. But this is based on the general Darwinian model that we have evolved from lower life species. And that evolution essentially began on a simple organism, one cell or multi-cell organism that continued to develop and evolve, and a natural selection of improving itself with the environment to give it the most likelihood to survive. Once you speak in that language, then perhaps the next stage of that evolution, as I mentioned, alluded before, is perhaps the machine. And you have the different films like The Matrix and others that actually pit machine versus man, man versus machine, because once you do create machines with such an intelligence, they can then determine that perhaps the human being is an inferior, a mutation, an inferior state. And why would a machine tolerate something that's inferior, that can make mistakes, even though we may have created it? So all these are fascinating questions, but I'm not just discussing it in a theoretical way. I want to talk about it in terms of our own beings and who we are. So it provokes those questions, and it provokes us asking that question, what is the human being? Now, I'm not going to make a scientific debate now, turn this into a scientific debate, whether we have a soul or whether that soul is just another part of the machine. I will use what I think is the best way to approach this, is what we call experiential proofs based on our experience. Is it possible to make an argument that we human beings just create illusions of romance and love and relationships and God and faith and nobility simply because our conscience just feels better about that? Can a case be made that Schopenhauer and other thinkers suggest that perhaps we're just another primate, another creature on earth that actually mutated the wrong way? It went too far. We became too intelligent for our own good. When it was a time where, in the earlier stages of our evolution, we just were essentially like every creature on earth. We mated, we breeded, we fed, we took care of our young, and we died. Some argue that the human mind evolved beyond its natural capacity and actually to its own detriment, creating what we call human neurosis, which doesn't exist in the animal world. The neurosis that we drive ourselves crazy, and we're restless, and we have aspirations, and we have anxieties that you simply don't find in the animal world. I should correct myself. You find it only when animals are exposed to humans. Right? Like I shared to someone that I know that comes to this class, that a couple, they told me they took their dog to a veterinarian, but not just a regular veterinarian, to an animal psychologist. Because the dog was acting up and becoming very aggressive and seemed very agitated. So the doctor told them, after examining the dog, that the dog is definitely fine, but is being exposed to agitation around it. And he asked if they argue. They said, yeah, they argue a lot. He says, you're causing the dog to become upset and anxious when it sees its masters arguing. So humans can actually corrupt animals. Animals in their own habitat would never have such anxiety. You don't take animals don't need to lie on a couch. And therapy, I don't know if you remember the film called Ants, Woody Allen's cartoon. So yeah, those ants were going to therapy because he was projecting on the ants human neurosis. But the animal kingdom, like the natural kingdom, is exactly the balanced. You're not going to see, for example, a herd of deer making an appointment with a therapist and saying that we're afraid of becoming prey to the predators in the wild. They could talk about their fears and their insecurities, and at night, and then there's the lions and the different predators that are out to kill them. Because it's part of the balance of life. That's how things work. So some can make an argument, maybe it's an extreme argument, that human beings got out of control. Their minds grew too big for them, for their own good. And if they would have just remained, so to speak, in that level of breeding, mating, feeding, giving birth, that would have been perfect. This whole thing, they created a whole industry of challenges and anxieties and courtship and romance. And they feel they need to go to museums and to movies and to sports and to find all kinds of ways to relieve some of their tensions and numb themselves or entertain themselves. You don't find that in the animal kingdom. You ever feel, let's say, a group of elephants saying, let's go to a movie tonight. We're nervous. Or we got to go out to dinner because we're sick and tired of having the same menu every day. That concept doesn't exist. It's actually I'm just making, it's a fictitious type of a little humor. Because it doesn't exist. Only humans have this. Is this natural to us or is this an unnatural? So the argument could be made, we are machines that have become, as I said, too sophisticated for our own good. And perhaps it is time to phase it out and get it down to a machine level like the Stepford Wives, where you can just keep everything programmed and you program a human being to have a little angst and a little discomfort, but not too much. Imagine you can do that. Take a pill, and that way keep yourself balanced in moods. I know some people do it with weed or other methods today, but we're talking about like in a more computerized way where it can become a permanent fixture within you. Now, most of us feel this would be a little quite insulting if anyone even suggests something like this, because part of the human condition is dealing with challenges and dealing with pain. But hypothetically, yes, if the human being was indeed a sophisticated machine, fine. Just like computers don't act up. You don't have a computer that says, I'm in a bad mood today. You can program it to do that. You can program, an Android to say, hey, I'm not in such a good mood today, which would give it a little spice and different change of, climate, because you don't have a computer that's just always cooperative. But you keep it at bay. You don't let it go out of hand. Is this really who we are? So I don't have a proof against it. You could make a very strong argument that's the truth, that we are a mutated form of evolution that has gone gone awry, gone the wrong way, too much. And as King Solomon writes, more knowledge, more pain. Maybe we have too much knowledge. If we weren't so aware, if we were more numb and less aware, we would have less angst and less anxiety. So what's the argument against it? The argument against it, does it resonate? Does it sound right to say? Does it sound right to say that every noble act, every kind deed, the selflessness and sacrifices we make in life, the love of our family, of our children, of our grandchildren, relationships, is all either a mutation or just simply an efficient way for nature to create, which is another argument, that nature and evolution creates for the health of the organism, for the species, it's important to have community. That's why there's collaboration. But it doesn't have any real truth of its own. It's simply necessary for survival of the species. I always go back to Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. It always, from the day one that I ever heard of that book, and all the time I think about it, the selfish gene, that the gene, by definition, is a selfish entity looking for resources and will compete and annihilate and do anything to gain those resources, which is essentially the survival of the fittest concept of natural selection. So the gene, by definition, is selfish. The fact that it may cooperate and behave selflessly is because part of its selfishness knows that cooperation feeds you. That way you can make an agreement with someone, negotiate, and you'll get something for it. But it's all still with selfish intention. And it troubled me because essentially with that you write off everything we give our lives for. You know, a person, for example, listens to a piece of music and they feel divine. They feel a sense of awe. What are we going to do with that? We're going to turn it into what? That's also the machine needs to feel a little awe. So now we're going to program a computer to feel awe when it sees the Niagara Falls or sees some other natural wonder. Is that what we are? Just a machine that feels awe because it has some benefit to the machinery? To me, it doesn't resonate. Is that a proof? I'm not going to argue the proof. I don't think proofs are a beginning and end of things. I would even submit that most of our most big important decisions in life are not based on logic. They're not necessarily irrational, but they're based on a combination of emotion and intuition and intelligence. Think of the biggest decisions you made in life. If you got married, who'd you marry? Why did you get married? Pure rational? Most people say it's very irrational. Or you could say super rational. But there's something about the decisions you make, big decisions. Even business people will tell you. I have 2 businesses that I can invest in. They both on paper sound great. What do you go with? So obviously you do your research to make sure it's legitimate as well as you can, but then there's an intuition, something, an intangible. You got to make a choice. How many choices like that do we make? Again, it's informed by intelligence, but is it a purely intelligent choice? Pure logic would say that if you meet a beautiful woman or a woman meets a beautiful man and they seem to be able to be soulmates, logic would say there's 1% chance it won't work out. Maybe there's 50% chance actually with statistics. So if you go pure logic, if you ask the machine, give me the numbers, it would say 80-20 based on the data you input. So logic would say, why take the 20% risk of such misery, of divorce, of a marriage or relationship not working out? And yet we'll take the leap. Why? Because life is not purely mathematics. We are not a product of mathematical equations. You think about your parents, and hopefully you have good memories about your parents. We'll take the scenario of healthy, nurturing parents. It's just a matter of biological, mathematical calculation. Their love to us was simply a few buttons pressed, and then I can just replace that with a machine. There's something that rubs you wrong when you hear that. Now, I know the skeptic could say, what rubs you wrong is you don't like to hear it that way. It sounds too brutal, too raw, too naked, too unromantic. That's true, but we're talking about resonance. There is resonance. And there's a resonance in a noble act. There's a resonance in a kindness. And I would even make the case that I think goodness resonates more with people than bad. I know people can behave very selfishly and very cruel, but still, I would submit, put anybody down and sit down, ask them what feels better, to do a good thing to help somebody or to hurt somebody. Except maybe psychopaths or sociopaths or people who've gotten stuck in very unhealthy situations. I don't see a person saying, you know what, I may have hurt someone, but I definitely feel bad that I hurt somebody. I would have preferred to help them. Because it's natural for us to feel. You see, let's say, God forbid, a child in the street, a homeless child, or a child that's helpless. What is our natural reaction? Ignore it, move on, or our heart goes out? Is that an illusion? Is that a mutation? You want to dismiss it as some type of like program glitch? Like I don't think most people would say that. They say there's something about it. Because then if you really think of it that way, look at what the Germans, what the Nazis did. They turned killing into a machine, into a science. They got it down to numbers. I don't even want to repeat the numbers. They got it down to how many people they can kill efficiently in an hour and how much gas can be used. And everything down to numbers, as the efficient engineers that Germans can be. In the most chilling way, doctors. Why? Because they were able to divorce the Jews or whoever else they felt were unfit into bugs, insects. It was no longer human for them. They turned, and they basically said it's worthless, so why not just exterminate? No different than you would exhume a building of termites or insects, God forbid the comparison. But you can see humans can suddenly stoop to such depths. And when we hear that, we don't say, the machine, the program went wrong. What could you do? Okay, created 6 million casualties. Nobody speaks that way. Your heart goes out, your blood boils. It's disturbing, even one person's death. I don't know who it was that said, they said, 10 people die, it's a tragedy. 6 million, it's a statistic. Yeah, it becomes a statistic because it's so unfathomable, it's so impossible to wrap your head around such a number. Men, women, children. So I don't claim that this is a scientific statement. Actually, I do claim it's scientific. I think science has got it wrong because science is not just about pure numbers. There's something more. There is a human, there's a heart. You hear people speak, teach. You want to have someone with a heart. Your mother and father, when you were a child, or even as an adult, you don't want to hear them telling you mathematically and logically, here's what should be done. You want to feel their heart. You want to feel they care. You want to feel they comfort. This is fundamental human elements. And I'm specifically not even using religious terms like soul and faith and God at this point. Because I want to make the case that actually that's a great question. Here's a machine, is offered to you for a certain price, and it could replace your child. And you'll have everything your child personality has, plus more. Mistakes won't be made. You won't have any aggravation. And here's the price. And it's not, let's say, a price that's not prohibitive. Would you do that? Is there anyone you know that would say yes? And they prove it to you. They prove, here, spend time with this android for a week or two and tell me if it's not exactly like your child. So, and you'll say, no, I don't want to do it. And someone will say, why not? Give me a logical reason. The answer is it won't be a logical reason. It'll be something's wrong. I can't put my finger on it. It's just something's missing. Can you show me? You could put him in bed or her in bed. The skin tone is the same. We even will create, there'll be a flu from time to time, a virus. You take the android to a doctor. Everything. It won't be a perfect human being. And your answer will be, I do not have words for it. There's something that just bothers me. And even if you told me this android will live forever and my child will not, because disease, infection, death, I don't think there's very few people that would say, no problem, let's go for it. Why? We never had to ask this question because no one ever made such a suggestion. And I hope no one ever will, to be honest. It's a hypothetical, but it's a good question. Because it forces you to start thinking what really makes a human being a human being. Remember, Arik Sharon was the prime minister in Israel. He was in the coma for a long time. Before that, he was one of the heroes, the war heroes in the 67 war. And the earlier wars, he was a veteran. He lost a son, unfortunately, at one of the battles. I'm not sure, in the late 60s could be. Yeah, he lost a son. Losing a child is not a simple matter. Losing a parent is also tragic. But a parent is older than a child. That's the natural. Losing a child is like losing the future. Losing the past is the way the cycle of life goes. I'm not minimizing it. But no one should ever know, and it's something, it's almost impossible to imagine what a parent can go through. So he wrote a letter, or actually, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I think, do I quote the letter in my book, Toward a Meaningful Life? I don't remember. I don't think so. I was going to quote it. So it's a very interesting letter that I want to just paraphrase, because I think it's a tremendous insight. Now, obviously, death affects us all. You see someone that you love dies. As I said, an android's not going to console you, no matter how perfect it is. Just like, God forbid, a one child, because one child dies, just because you have other children, that doesn't console you. You say, you know what, at least I have 8 out of 9. I mentioned that number because my uncle was killed in a car accident. My grandmother had 9 children. So she didn't say, at least I have 8/9 of my family. It doesn't work that way. It's like one of the reporters, a journalist, once came to her and asked her, her name is Mrs. Lipsker, was my mother's mother's name, and says to her, how could you, it was a contemporary writer, how could you, 9 children, it's a lot of children, how do you spread the love to 9 children? It's a lot of children. So my grandmother responded to her, said, at first my grandmother, I remember when she said to her, she says, you probably never had children, right? Right. So you're asking me hypothetically, you'll have children, you'll understand, but let me give you my explanation. She said, love is not a mathematical equation. It's not like, let's say you have a cake, you can cut it into 9 pieces, and in 90 pieces, no one's going to get anything because it's just going to be, that's a cake. That's a physical entity. Love is not a physical entity that you divide into 9 parts and give everyone 1/9 of the love. My grandmother gave the analogy of the sun. When the sun shines on Earth, it's reflected in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, just like it's reflected in 1 drop of water. So if you have 9 drops of water, is 1 drop going to have less of the sun than another? It doesn't work that way. Everyone gets the sun. That's how love works. And it really forces us to think in terms that there are things in life that are not commodities. We live in such a commodity-based society where we purchase things. And you have only money for that many things. And everything's measured by quantity. But there's a whole reality called quality. And quality does not work quite the same way. Love, if you have love, it's not like, oh, you know what, I ran out of love. Like your car ran out of gas. Nobody runs out of love. You may need to measure and discipline it for other reasons, but it's not like suddenly, oh no, I have no more love inside me to give you. Is that possible? If you love somebody, you can give for all forever. And like a flame, think of a flame, using the example of a flame. A flame is the only entity that can light another flame without the first flame being diminished. If I have a cup of water and I pour some water to you, I'm going to have less. There's no way, unless I refill it. Because that's the nature. The fundamental parameters of physical existence is defined by time and space. You're sitting in your chair, I'm sitting in my chair. 2 people cannot occupy the same space, and 2 people can eat the same food. If I give you part of my food, I have less. I give you some of my money, I have less. But how about love? 2 people can be sitting in different seats, but their love turns them into one. As a matter of fact, there can be one person that loves you. The 2 lovers, beloveds, can be 1,000,000 miles apart, and space doesn't change. That's not because, oh, you're 1,000,000 miles away, I don't love you until you get closer to me. Love is not defined by space. You could sit near someone and not love them, and you can be very distant from someone physically and love them as if they're right here with you. So even though 2 people occupy 2 different seats, but love transcends space. Why? As he says in the Tanya, because love is soulful, and the soul does not occupy space. Bodies occupy space. So in that sense, there's a whole other dimension that's just hard to quantify. Going back to the letter to Mr. Sharon, so he said, the Rebbe writes to him a very nice, very beautiful, very touching letter. He says, I console you for the loss. But I want you to know, what is it that we truly mourn when we grieve over someone that we've lost? We don't grieve over their physical body. We grieve over their person, their personality, their smile, their cry, the energy they gave off, which was manifest in a thing called a body. But at the end of the day, it's not the body that we connect to, it's the personality. You love your son or you love your daughter, in this case, the son. You love him for what he was, and you want to now embrace that. When you hug your son, when you embrace your son, you're not just embracing his arms and legs. It's not just an object. You're embracing the person. And the person is not something that's tangible. And that person continues on its journey even after death, which is the fundamental principle in Jewish thought, that the soul never dies. The body, the container, is no longer there. And I always use an analogy, which I don't like to use a humorous analogy, but it's a very good analogy. I've been asked many times, as you can imagine. People ask the question, especially when they're sitting, and no one should know of Shiva. After the loss of someone, they always ask, where did the soul go? Where does the soul go? Who hasn't asked that question after 120 years, as we put it? Where does it go? Is it at peace? Is it in pain? Does it see me? Does it recognize me? Can I connect? No, big question, one of the big questions. And you always struggle as a rabbi and going to a Shiva calls and trying to struggle behind how do you explain this, especially in a moment of real loss. But then, I don't know, for once something came to me that struck me that I realized, and I started answering this question, obviously in a sensitive way, based on the circumstances. Here, thank God, we're sitting not in a house of Shiva, so we could talk about it a little more academically. And I started telling people, listen, let me. The whole question is based on a false premise. Why? Because let me use a humorous analogy of a refrigerator and electricity. Okay. And here's the imaginary dialogue. The imaginary dialogue goes like this. The refrigerator says to electricity, where do you go? Electricity. Where do the electricity goes after they pull the plug of the refrigerator? And the electricity responds incredulously, what kind of chutzpah, what nerve do you have to ask me such a question? What do you mean where I go? You're a little box called a refrigerator. They just invented you the last 100 or 200 years ago. And now you're thinking you're the center of the universe, suggesting you are where it's at. You ask me where I go. I go back to my natural place before I was confined in your little box. I go outside of time and space, wherever electricity resides. It's only that little period of time that you were able to contain me and able to generate me and able to contain me and turn me into a force that refrigerates food. That's all you know, that little box. I go back to my space that's completely outside of you that you can't even imagine because you never existed there. And I say the same thing is here. When we say where a soul goes to, it's assuming we are where it's at. This is the center of the universe, my consciousness. So you wonder, where does the soul go to? But maybe the soul's like electricity, and your body is the refrigerator that it'll spend some time with, 100 years, 120 years, 80 years, 90 years, whatever it may be. And it goes back to its place that's beyond time and space as we know it. And it's right here in this room, just like electricity is in this room, not only in the refrigerator. But a refrigerator can never relate to that because it doesn't know anything outside of its own little box. And I've yet to meet somebody that said to me, what are you talking about? It completely resonates. Everybody relates to it. The sadness is we want the electricity in the refrigerator. We want the soul inside the body that I know. That's why we grieve and that's why we mourn. I'm not suggesting that suddenly we shouldn't feel sad. The sadness is that they had to separate. But don't ever think that the soul didn't exist before it came to this box and continues to travel even after this box. I'm paraphrasing, but this was essentially the consolation. Your child lives on and the spirit is there. The sadness is we can't touch it. You'd like to hold that child again. You'd like to have a conversation with someone you love. Like a real conversation, not just a spiritual conversation. So that's why we are sad. But don't ever think the soul is not in a peaceful place. The soul sees us, we don't see it. That's the nature of spirituality. It sees us, and the physical refrigerator cannot see electricity. You could sense it at times and so on. So when you think in these terms, then let's talk back about machines. Yeah, you can create a machine that can copy every quirk and every detail. If you're really good, you study someone's life, you study long enough, you can know exactly how they're going to react to any joke and to anything. You could even create spontaneity. Like I said with the chess machine, he actually had some intuition. I'm not shocked by that because intuition is also something you can program. Not you program the intuition. The computer has enough information to know that sometimes you can't go by the information. You have to use the sum of it all and come up with some original approach. You know, that's also possible because we're basically implanting in these machines things that we know and as much as possible. But you cannot put a soul into that machine. And absolutely, soul is critical here. You know why? Because souls were here before the machines were here. So I would put it in a very simple equation. If you see yourself as a machine, don't be shocked that there one day will be a machine that can replace you, a better machine. You know? If you see yourself as a soul inside of a machine, inside of a box, that's irreplaceable. That cannot be replaced. And I go back, even though I don't want to invoke, again, I will invoke the biblical term for it, but I want to invoke the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, and by virtue of their Creator, they have inalienable rights endowed to them by their Creator. The right of pursuit of happiness. I don't even remember the full expression. Basically, the basic rights that we have. And I've always wondered, these are deists that wrote it. The founding fathers were not trying to impose religion. As a matter of fact, religion, the church and state was being separated. And yet they chose the word creator and then used the word creator again with inalienable rights. Why? Because it's very, very, I've never seen this, but I'm convinced the reason is very simple. Because they could have easily written, all men are born equal, all men are equal. You don't have to say creator. Creator right away. Creator, who created? Because they understood something. Remember that the first Americans that came here were escaping religious oppression. They knew very well the oppression of the Church of Europe. And when they declared the independence, they were dealing with King George and also the authority of a monarch who determined who had rights and who didn't have rights, completely unilaterally. It was not up to any vote. Up till the United States, there was no country that institutionalized a Bill of Rights of individuals. There was the Magna Carta, there were documents, but a country based on a principle like that, it didn't exist. So they realized, how do you guarantee absolute rights? What will happen if George Washington becomes president, for example, and he decides he wants to become King George, or him and his family? What will stop that from happening? If you say all people are born equal, you could say, well, not all people are born equal, some are not. Once you associate it with the Creator, you're saying not George Washington, not King George, and not the head of the church, and not the Pope, nobody, and not the chief rabbi, created human beings. Since none of us are creators, we're all equally right, all equal in the eyes of God. And they realized that was the only guarantee. Take away Creator, and then some people could say, hey, we're the majority, and we don't like Jews, we don't like Catholics, we don't like Muslims. They understood that they needed some type of absolute statement called Creator that would guarantee. Basically, they understood that you have to recognize that humans are not machines. Because a machine, you know what? Some machines are meant to serve other machines. That a human is fundamentally some type of soul. However you define that. You can define it in secular ways too. A soul. And that soul is sacred and has, yes, inalienable rights because it has indispensable dignity. And you cannot, no one can take that away. Now, if you think of it in context of biblical terms, which is where, by the way, the founding fathers got these ideas, wasn't their own ideas. Where did they get it from? They got it from the principle that it says right in the beginning of the Bible, and they were very well versed in the Bible. As a matter of fact, I would go a step further. There's a great book by Michael Novak called On Two Wings. I've mentioned it a number of times, where he writes, one of his chapters, I think, begins that the basis of the American Constitution is Torah metaphysics, the word Torah, not even Bible, definitely not Old Testament. And they took, the book is not a theoretical book. He quotes documents and letters and correspondence by the founding fathers, how they based their philosophies on Jewish biblical thinking, including the concept that man is created in the divine image, which is essentially, in different words, how they framed the Declaration of Independence. They don't have to use the word divine image. They're saying inalienable rights endowed by the Creator, that we're all equal. That's the point. No way can you say that about machines. That means there's something that's intangible. And that intangible thing is ultimately what makes us unique. So yes, can you program a machine to have all the personality traits, genes, and so on? I'm sure that will be possible. You'll probably even be able to create, I just thought of it this moment, of machines that can mate. Can they give birth to a child? Well, listen, if you can replicate it in a laboratory, then you can replicate it in a program. You know? But as the famous joke goes, the scientist, atheist, is in his laboratory, is experimenting, and he basically says to his colleague, we don't need God for anything today. We can do everything ourselves. So the guy who is a believer says to him, okay, let's see you create a plant to grow out of the ground. It's no problem. He gathers some dirt. He's about to do something that will replicate the growth process, the vegetation process. When suddenly there's a cry out from heaven, God is speaking, he says, do it, but use your own earth. He's using the earth that's there already. It's very nice to replicate it after you have all the nutrients and everything that earth comes with. Use your own earth, you hear? So there's an element that I'm just using my own terms, a type of mystique, a type of intangible element that every human being knows exists. And you know it especially when you have feelings for someone, whether it's in love, whether it's compassion, empathy. There's something that is not machine-like about it. Now I know that a scientist can tell you exactly what chemicals that are flowing through your brain, and when you see someone hurt, all kinds of different chemicals that arouse compassion, and there are chemicals that arouse love, and there are chemicals that arouse empathy, and there are chemicals that arouse anger. I got it all. That just tells you that they know how to quantify it in a chemical. But that doesn't tell you that began with a chemical. When you see someone cry, okay, you see tears come out of someone's eyes, no one's going to say, first you cry and then you feel sad, right? First a person feels sad, then in some way it translates into, for some reason, into the teardrops in your tear ducts, and you cry. Just like when a person is happy, for some reason the face turns into a smile, even newborns. Today we know, for example, music affects everybody. Children in the embryonic stage, fetuses, at a certain stage, they move to music. There's been evidence when the music is played, they will see them move their legs and arms. Now, where do they know how to move their legs and arms? It's one thing once they emerge and they see adults do it, so they mimic. Language, even language is a mystery. That at 3 years old, you're already speaking. It's fine, right? You're mimicking the language, but there's some intelligence in language. It's not just you're mimicking sounds. We know there's something beyond. But where do they know this music? So yes, you can create a robot, an android, a machine that will respond to music. I don't see that as complicated at all. Music, once the machine is able to hear music and is programmed to react a certain way, it can even go into a dance and so on. But there's something, as I said, a invisible, mystique that you can't put your finger on, but you know it's there. Whether it's the spirit, whether it's the soul, there's something there. And as I said with the tears, yes, it's true that you can explain that sadness will turn into tears, but what causes sadness? Their scientists are not that easy to explain. Like I said with the earth. Once they have a piece of earth, they'll tell you the nutrients necessary. They can replicate them. They can create synthetic seeds, because they're replicating. Like we know that that can be done, just like we replicate the bird in a plane, and the eye in a camera. So obviously you can replicate. But what made the earth have those powers? What makes a person feel sad? We understand that when a person feels love, there's a certain chemical. But what's causing that? What's causing the love in the first place? What's causing the chemical to react that way? There you get into the mysteries of the human being, why some people are attracted to another person. Now I know some scientists say, give me enough data, and I could tell you exactly who will be attracted to whom. Everything will be predictable. In the late 19th century, there was a thinker, a philosopher, a scientist called Laplace. Laplace, Laplace from France. And he made the suggestion that disturbed terribly the church, that the only reason we cannot predict human behavior till the end of time is because we're lacking data. Give me all the data on a person, and I can predict everything that person will do, which of course challenged the concept of free will, meaning that everything is predictable, because the only reason is we just don't know the information. But there was relief once Heisenberg's uncertainty principle became a given fact in science, that there was a level of unpredictability and uncertainty, not due to lack of information, but due to a fundamental state of indeterminism at a certain state of the microscopic world, quantum mechanics. Well, that brought back the picture, no, that's not about just lack of data. That there are realities that cannot be predicted because they are not defined until a certain stage. So when you include that into the equation, yeah, even though they are working on developing the quantum chip, which will infinitely speed up computers in new ways that are unprecedented, and you could probably therefore program quantum mechanics in a robot as well to be unpredictable, if you wish. However, there's some element, there's some X factor that can only come from something that's not tangible. So maybe it comes down to this. We spoke about it last week in the context of sexual harassment. I know what's the connection, you'll see in a moment. Ultimately, maybe the artificial intelligence challenge really challenges us to realize that maybe that we really do believe that there is ultimately a God that creates the human being. And again, I say God, I don't necessarily mean a religious definition of it, but even all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence version. What means a God? That if we are godless creatures, meaning we are machines that just popped into being and evolved, then as I said, a machine can always be replaced. That's one of the theories of evolution, actually, that the species that went extinct, they were not efficient enough. They were replaced by more competing species who competed for resources and were able to survive. However, when you introduce God into the picture, then who put the earth there? Who created intelligence for us to create artificial intelligence? That's going to be the big question. And that's a whole other challenge and a whole other story. And in that context, it's another story. It's like the thing that I always thought about so often, and it's almost a basic question. I spoke about it with scientist friends that I know, that basically simple. You know, they say, okay, that most their scientific theories, the world, they give the age of the universe to be around 13 billion years. Again, I'm going to get into how they calculated that. But and describe the stages of development, what they call the Big Bang. What is the Big Bang? The Big Bang is a volatile soup of gases and different elements that in its combustion chamber, so to speak, ultimately explode, and the process begins of what is called creation. The big question, the elephant in the room is always, so how those gases get there? How did even one gas get there? So there, science will say, we don't answer that question. That we can tell you once we know there's a gas, what happens afterwards. So really, they just pushed off the question. They just replaced the question of God. Instead of saying who created the human being, you just create who created the first gas. You know that joke they tell about Chelm. Are you familiar with the city of Chelm? Chelm is this town in Poland that was, they say, very smart people actually. But the neighbors were resentful, so they created this folklore of the stupid people of Chelm, like Polish jokes. So one of them goes like this. Chelm is a small little shtetl town, the 18th, 19th century. The way they traveled in this little town was the good old way of horse and buggy, a carriage, a horse, a donkey, a camel. I don't know if there were camels in the Chelm, but you get the idea. One day, one of the people from Chelm travels to the big city. He sees, wow, there's a new invention. It's called the locomotive, the train. Sees a steaming engine, car, and behind it are cars, and it's moving, and they're all moving with them. So he asks somebody, what causes this thing to move? I don't see a horse pulling it. He only knows horses are a live creature that pulls a wagon. So he came to the conclusion that it's being pushed by the car behind it. The car behind, the second car, is pushing the first car. But then he wonders who's pushing the second car. So he looks at the third car is pushing the second car. And then there's the fourth car, and the fifth car. So he says, that's how it works. It's a strange thing, but that's how it works. The cars are pushing each other. So someone says to him, and who pushes the last car? He says, I forgot to ask that question. So fine, so you just replace the question. Okay, so the first car is being pushed by the second, but who's pushing the last car? Now, I understand science can argue that it's outside the realm of scientific theory that can only work with givens, with something that it can measure. But we're left with that dilemma, that gas, how did it get there? Okay, there's the argument that it was always there. But then how did the gas suddenly explode? So it needs to be other things as well. The bottom line, I'm not even getting into the argument of design, that you see that this explosion didn't create just chaos. It created sophisticated and extremely complex working organisms. And like the classic example, imagine ink spilling out and then suddenly saying all the works of Shakespeare just happened by accident. The ink spilled out and just happened to formulate these magnificent works of literature, or the same with music. So what you get away from is not just something put it there. The question is, more importantly, that there's a soul behind something. And that is the basis of a different way of looking at the universe. So that the artificial intelligence debate is actually really a debate, not whether machines will destroy us or enhance us. The question is really, who are we? That's the debate. What makes a human being a human being? If we are a machine, then there's no question, a better machine can replace us. But if we're more than a machine, but beyond our wires there is some type of soul, then it's a whole different reality. So I predict the following, and hope maybe we'll all be old enough to see it happen. That machines, yes, artificial intelligence will develop, create unbelievable miracles in the sense of creating, artificially replicating things that today we couldn't even imagine. And yes, there will be people who will say that may replace the human race, but that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because what it's going to do, it's going to force the human to dig deeper and realize that we have something more than a machine. We have a soul. So ironically, it's machines that are going to teach us about our soul more than humans will. So artificial intelligence may be the best mystics and rabbis and spiritual leaders, because they will teach us what makes a human unique. And yes, machines will enhance our lives like it does right now. What at the end of the day is a good piece of technology? Beyond all the sensationalism and all the novelty, essentially it's a good tool chest. Once upon a time you had a hammer and a screwdriver of one sort. Today you have one that's far, far more sophisticated. I say this because I grew up from a world that was once used a typewriter. I used to use a typewriter. Any of you ever seen a typewriter? Have you? Where? Museum. Okay, museum, right. A physical typewriter. And to type on a piece of paper, and the paper got sometimes stuck, and then you had to white out, and then you had to retype. It's unthinkable today. You know, I mean, how many balls of paper I threw into waste baskets of the drafts that didn't work out. Today you have a word processor. You don't need any of that. Everything is... So I saw technology, I grew with it in the early 80s. Then I remember the first fax machines. And then, of course, the early stages of the internet. It was called then a BBS. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Bulletin board system. Electronic documents. And then in the 90s, 94, 95, internet, email. Remember, America Online, CompuServe, Prodigy. And as it developed from there. I still had my first computer, that was called a Commodore. I actually had a thing called a WordStar. It's one big unit. The keyboard's built in, it's a green screen, 5 meg of memory. It cost $5,000. We also designed Hebrew fonts. I'm not going to go through all the details. So part of history. This is prehistoric times, when we were still in caves. Okay. So I saw technology, and I never was, for me technology was a good utility, like a better telephone. It took me 2 days to type up, let's say, a talk or a transcript or an article that I wrote, an essay. With a computer, 1 day, because you don't have to retype it. And you can manipulate words and so on. Basically, I'm a better machine. So I saw machines replace machines all the time. And as I said, I'm sure there'll come a point where they will be as replicate, not just the typing, but replicate actually human beings and can do things that we do today. But if you understand that it's a great utility, so there'll be excellent utility. There'll be machines that can literally replace, you will not need someone to clean your house. If someone that the machine can do that, you can tell it, speak to it, it speaks back to you and all that. No problem. And it could be far more even sophisticated than that. But it's a utility because there's another part called the human soul. Now, as I said earlier, I'm not going to make the case. I already made my case for it. I'm not making a mathematical case for it. I'm making a case that I think will be inevitable to recognize because that's what will happen. You'll see a machine that literally can, as I said before, can look exactly like the person you love, can act like them, can be neurotic like them, can be unpredictable, can even argue with you. You can program someone's going to argue with you. That was the problem with the Stepford wives. They didn't argue, they looked like machines, and they just became so compliant. So they'll even argue with you, and even go to therapy with you. But will you replace your child with that machine? God forbid. I don't think there's a person that will do that. So you'll say, okay, because we haven't seen the options. No, because we will discover then dimensions of the soul that we have not yet discovered. Today, we still don't need to push it. Because today, machine is still a primitive thing. It doesn't compare to the human spirit. But the day will come that a machine can replicate the human spirit. We will dig deeper and find that what the real human spirit is like. That's my prediction. One of the articles I saw about the topic, Wall Street Journal, so a writer comes up with a great idea. He says, how do we resolve this issue, the debate between, let's say, Hawking or Musk and some others that say that they're concerned that this will be the end of the human race, and people like Kurzweil and others that say it's the enhancement of the human race? So he came up with a brilliant suggestion, one writer I saw, that we have to use machines to make our minds more developed. So we'll be able to keep up with the machines. You understand? In other words, there's a competition. The machine could replace the human. But if we expand and use the machines to enhance, so then we can keep ahead of the game. And what happens if the machines run a little quicker and you create even a better machine? His solution is still the machinistic version of life. Make a human being a better machine so we can compete. I don't think we'll ever compete. You show me someone like I saw. We already mentioned something. I mentioned before that everyone thought that no way you're going to beat the number one chess champion on earth, a machine, and it did. And every time you use a calculator, the machine is beating you. Why? Because why don't you figure it out yourself? Because it's going to take you forever, especially if it's complicated. And you have to be foolish. Why not use the machine? It crunches numbers quicker. Why be efficient? It's like not wanting to use a telephone, or not wanting to get on a subway or fly in a plane because I might as well walk. That's not what these machines are there to enhance. But they haven't yet challenged what we're really made of. Real competition is when it comes down to that the machine will look exactly like you, and will you replace yourself with that? And I submit absolutely not. And this goes back to now, if you really want some prophecies that are discussed in the Bible that talk about a time, interestingly, where malachtacha nasa al yidei acherim is the expression. There'll be a time when your toil and labor will be done by others. which is considered the messianic age, that you don't have to do anything yourself. Basically, physical labor will be done by others. Now, most people think at that stage will be done by servants, but it can perfectly mean artificial intelligence that do that work. You go back into the Bible, but pre-eating of the tree of knowledge, what did Adam and Eve do? They weren't yet challenged, even with birth pain. They were not challenged with that they have to work the sweat of their brow to make a living. They basically had everything done for them. Had they not eaten from that tree, they would just basically 24/7, everything would be provided, and they would simply need to work on their spiritual growth. La'avda l'shamra, to serve and to protect, to bring the world to higher states of transcendence and spiritual consciousness. But that didn't happen. In the future, the way the Torah predicts is that the world will go back to that state where we will no longer need to labor ourselves. We'll have someone else laboring, so we can then focus on our own inner and spiritual growth. When we worked 8 to 10 or 12 hours in the field before the Industrial Revolution, because we needed the potatoes, we needed the rice, we needed the bread. So we had to toil for it. We didn't have machines that were doing it for us. That dramatically changed in the 1840s, that period in that time, what they call the Industrial Revolution. In essence, was in one sentence, the whole revolution was one thing. It created machines that can do the work that may take you 8 hours, it will take the machine 1 hour or less. Just like if you had to dig a well and you don't have any tools, you'd have to use your hands and spend all day or weeks and months. A shovel does it faster. And an automated shovel does it even faster, to the point you don't even need a human being running the machine. That is industrialization. Artificial intelligence is a new stage of that. After the computer revolution, it takes it to another level where you can automate even not just the physical labor of threshing a field and gathering this grain, but even things like human labor, things that you still need humans, secretaries. That whole middle man, do you remember the day when you needed to go to a printer? Do you remember the first time there was desktop printing? It cut out a whole segment of a whole industry. People who did, we're not talking about hard, high-level printing with books and colorful manuals, but basic printing, no more, doesn't exist. You can print from your desktop. Very nice presentation. What happened to, remember, Napster and music? Where are the music stores in this country? They don't exist anymore, unless they found some novel way of still selling something. Because you can get music online and download it. What do you need to go buy and go to a store and have to pay them the overhead that they need, real estate, etc., etc. So artificial intelligence, with no question, was going to replace a lot. But then will be the real challenge of what we are. And that's what these prophecies suggest, that when all the work will be done for you by someone else, and this can include an artificial intelligence, then what will you be doing? You'll be going back to the real purpose of your existence, transcendence. I mentioned this a number of times because it's just a fascinating statistic. I'm always blown away by it. Admiral Adam Rickover, was a Jewish admiral in the U.S. Navy who rose to the highest level of a 4-star general. In the Navy in America, there's only 4 stars, no, not 5, like in the Army or the Air Force. He came from Europe. I think he came right before the Holocaust. Not sure exactly, or maybe escaped from the Holocaust. And he rose through the ranks and he became, as I said, they called him the father of the nuclear navy, because he transformed the Navy of the United States into a nuclear navy. He gave a talk in 1955, I believe, at the Pentagon. And his talk was, I don't know the whole talk, but one key statistic. He said, I wanted to review what happened the last 100 years in the world, from 1855 to 1955. And the statistic he came up with is the following, that in 1855, 90% of energy in the world. We need energy, whatever it's electricity, heat, water, whatever, all the energy in the world. 90% of it was generated by human labor. And in 1955, 90% of energy is generated by machines. So he said two key things. Again, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact words. Two key things came out and resulted from that. Had tremendous implications. One was that in these last 100 years, the accumulation of wealth completely went off the charts. No longer did it just grow, because anyone controlling these machines suddenly was able to accumulate wealth far, far behind. Even in 1855, even if you owned every farm in the country, okay, so you're wealthier than many others. But you didn't have that capacity of not having, you still needed human labor. And human labor is labor intensive, literally, and takes time and sweat and energy and human error and all that. Once you control machines, you control an output that is impossible to even imagine how much you can produce. And the second thing it created was a new concept called leisure, free time. When 90% of energy is created by humans, and you want to eat dinner, there's no machine to go to. There's no 24-hour stores on Broadway where you can just go buy any fruit in season or out of season. You have to work in the field under the sweat under the sun to get yourself a bushel of potatoes or rice or bread or whatever it is, and anything a little extra you traded with someone, and that was that. And you sat down to dinner at night, you were so exhausted, you had no time, you went right to sleep until the next day's labor. Simple as that. So once machines took over, what happened to human beings? A lot of free time. Now we take it for granted. What I was blown away was because I grew up like you did, after 1955. And we don't even think about it. It's how much free time we have. A few years ago, we were in our office organization, we were looking at creating a type of program that would help people to live more meaningful lives, just like you have time management, some way of gauging your day and trying to turn your day into a more meaningful day. And the thing we hit a glitch was, I never would have anticipated, but then became obvious. Nobody wants to have a record of how much time they waste in the day. Try making a record tomorrow. Make a calculation from the morning you wake up till at night. Calculate how many hours you waste. You will not want to know, and you're not going to do it again. So that was like a fatal flaw. We couldn't do it because nobody wants to write down that I spent 3 hours playing a video game. And someone will say, 3 hours playing a video game? You have to be crazy. You could have done so many good things in those 3 hours. Well, we're human beings. The absurdity of the human condition is well known. But that's how it is. Maybe you're an exception. But nobody wants to know that. So how much leisure, how much free time there is. And God forbid, we suddenly see we have free time. When, God forbid, there's an emergency, you suddenly have time for the emergency. How? Where'd it come from? Because the things you're doing are not necessarily that necessary. They are optional. That optional, you've turned it into, no, I'm very busy today. I have meetings and this meeting. Every meeting can be canceled. Every meeting is not life and death. I'm not criticizing people. I think it's a blessing that we have the ability to live our lives and we don't have to sweat 9-10 hours in the field. Don't get me wrong. It's all a blessing. Just like artificial intelligence is a blessing, all technology is a blessing. But what we're going to be left with is, what are we left when we're stripped and you don't no longer have to work in the fields, and you no longer even have to clean your house, and you no longer have to do anything because everything's being done by machines. So people who have a pessimistic view on the human race will say humans will commit suicide. They're going to be so bored. God forbid. Others will say they just self-destruct in leisure. Where do you think exploded? I mean, this Rickover didn't say this. When did drug addiction and alcohol addiction explode? Especially drug addiction. Only when there's free time. You're spending 9 hours in the field and then you're exhausted and you have to eat a meal. You have no time to sit around and say, let's take a little weed and just bliss out. There's no time. There's work to be done. There's survival. So leisure creates all kinds of new ways to fill that leisure. Now, I'm not suggesting that there wasn't nonsense and there wasn't frivolous behavior before 1855, because everything is relative. But the amount of leisure that we have I mean, you start counting how many hours people watch football or baseball and soap operas, things that have absolutely no difference in life. It's entertaining, fine, keeps you busy. It's a tremendous amount of time. That's why there are major industries. Industries based on what? Nothing to do with survival, nothing to do with life and death. And then there's industries upon industries. Then you have talk radio that you're talking about these games even after they finished and before they begin. And then even out of the season, you're talking about the trades. And then there's the talking about the trades for the trades. And then, of course, there's college football, in case you're missing something. If not that, there's high school football. You can go all the way to nursery school football, I'm sure. I don't think they've gotten there. They can't monetize that yet. But you get the idea. And I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm not exaggerating the case. I'm just pointing it out. So if you have a very negative view of the human being, like let's say like Freud had, then essentially when this happens, it's not going to bode well. What are people going to do with so much free time? They're going to stoop to the lowest common denominator of self-destructive behavior, basically, self-indulgent, hedonistic behavior. However, if you have the view, and I'll say even the founding fathers, and definitely the biblical view, that you were created in the divine image and you're a soul, what are you going to do with your free time? You're going to get back to what you really were created for in the first place. To be a more soulful person, to be a kinder person, to be more transcendent, to elevate, to illuminate, to teach, give and take. The real, what we really are made of, what makes a human being. That we are here to build, to love each other and to grow. I know it sounds childish and simplistic, but that's what it comes down to. And all these machinations and all these complexities that we've created, careers and all that, may all suddenly melt away because it'll all be mechanized. It'll all be mechanical. So my prediction is that the soul will rise and it will enhance the human race. It may come with some growing pains, because it always takes time for people to adjust. But there comes a point, and I see this very often, where people have so much leisure and so much free time that is the boomerang effect. They just, from basically boredom, they come to suddenly find something because they're desperate. They're desperate to get out of this type of like limbo. So as much as we like to dream that you don't have a job and no deadlines and no pressure and no one breathing down your back, you could just lie on a beach forever. Try it out. Tell me how long you're going to last there. And you're lying on the beach and you say, I want some action. The human spirit is restless. And it's restless, so we replace that, we feed that restlessness sometimes with the pursuit of money, the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of sexual pleasure, the pursuit of the different pleasures that give us our instant gratification. But then there's another part of the human being that's what we'll call the spirit of the human being that seeks permanent transcendence. Not something just a quick fix, something that really resonates. And that's what we call love, and we call that God, and we call that soul, and we call it truth, and we call all the other words I used earlier, words that describe the noble side of a human being. So it's all how you see yourself. If you do see yourself in a very inferior way, just another machine, you're going to have big challenges when better machines come around to make a case that you're better than they are. But if you see yourself as a noble, dignified, majestic creature that is here to bring to the world a higher state of awareness, that is only going to is the domain of the human being. And yes, you can create machines that can help you do that, but there will be tools, great tools, and those tools will grow as you grow. But it's a very different type of picture. And if you look, as I said, the prophecies, they all talk about this age. They talk about the age when they will turn swords into plowshares. It's actually right there by the UN, the wall. What's it called? The Isaiah wall has these quotes from Isaiah. They will turn swords into plowshares, turn weapons basically into forces for good, and turn all the things that we consider to be mechanical into, again, tools for human growth. And these are filled with verses upon verses that really describe the future. And if you think about it, it's the future of a world that will make it, that life will be very easy to live physically. And our real challenge will be, where our real motivation and exertion will be in spiritual affairs. To use the expression from Maimonides, the Rambam, he says there will be a time when the world's business will be nothing but to knowing God. In other words, materialism will be a means for spiritual growth, not an end in itself. Today it's an end in itself. What do I want to make money? With money I want to buy things. That money, and he says later that Madanim Simkov, the world will be filled with delights that are so plentiful like the dust of the earth. Some people predict that with money becoming abundant in that fashion, that it won't have any value. It's all value is in its rarity, in supply and demand. Once there's so much supply, then the demand will not be there. So it may lose its value too in this new age. So what will people be doing? They'll be doing what they were really meant to do. It says spiritual growth. In the words of Isaiah as well, that there will no longer be evil and destruction on my holy mountain, because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. And therefore there will be world peace and the elimination of famine and war and unhealthy jealousies and acrimony and all the other vices between human beings. That's a very different vision, and artificial intelligence perfectly works right into that, because it takes care of the physical. It's like going back to the Garden of Eden and someone else is plowing the fields, metaphorically speaking, meaning all type of fields, doing the work. And we can focus on that growth that is our destiny. So I hope I did some justice to this artificial intelligence topic, and may we all benefit from its gifts and blessings, which actually even today, as I said, we already have so much that we're freed of. Almost every day you find new things that speed things up. The question is, what do you do with that extra time? And that extra time is really meant for you to use it for personal growth, spiritual growth, love, all the things that the greatest aspirations we have. So everyone have a very intelligent week. And maybe some day it won't even be called artificial intelligence, it'll just be called intelligence. It's artificial because it's not like us. But it will be indistinguishable, but we will have what we'll call soulful intelligence, emotional intelligence, intelligent intelligence. So everyone be well until next week, 8:15, 8:30 till whenever we do it. Thank you very much. Stay in touch, one second, stay in touch. Like us, friend us. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, and we send out weekly emails. And please be in touch with us if we can be of any help to you in your journey. Thank you.